October of 2024, just 3 months ago, when I was first learning automation, I discovered n8n. And since then, I have been able to create numerous automations, including these three, which are available on my Gumroad site. And the reason I was able to do so much so quickly is because of the power and flexibility of n8n. I'm going to tell you why I believe n8n is going to crush Zapier and Make.com in 2025. I'm going to show you what's great about n8n, including its power and flexibility. And I'm going to show you what's annoying about n8n because it is not perfect. I'm going to give you the two most powerful nodes in n8n. And then I'm going to share one tip, the one thing that n8n does that no other software, Zapier, Make.com, Active Pieces, none of the other automation tools that I have used do this one simple thing that allowed me to create this 52 node long podcast automation, which creates all of the metadata for the podcast, uploads it to a podcast host, and then creates a complete blog post. All of this was written by AI from the transcript of the podcast. And I was able to do it in just a few weeks of using n8n. So let me show you what is so awesome about n8n and why you, as a solopreneur who needs to fix their problems in order to remove friction from their business, need to be using n8n in 2025. Hey there, it is I versus AI, and this is n8n's user interface. The user interface of an automation app is pretty darn important. Not only does it allow you to do what you need to do quickly, but it also needs to be easy on the eyes because believe me, you're going to be looking at this thing for many, many hours as you build out your automations. So the user interface needs to be functional, it needs to be practical, it needs to be clean, it needs to be minimal, and n8n hits all of those points out of the park. And I'm going to show you about the user interface and particularly the nodes, which is each step of a workflow, this workflow here, which takes in names to join a wait list for my community, the AI Automators Prompt Crafting Society, which is opening now. It is a place to gather to learn about AI automation, particularly with n8n, to get access to my AI automations, to join a weekly call where we co-build automations together. It's the best way to learn quickly. For that community, I needed to have a simple waitlist automation that would gather in the names as people filled them out in a form, because a form trigger is one of the numerous ways that you can start an automation with n8n. And here's one of the wonderful things about n8n. As far as I know, there's no limit on the number of triggers that you can have on an automation. So there may be times when you want to trigger an automation manually. There may be times when you want to do a schedule, but other times when you want to do it off the schedule whenever you need to. So you have the schedule automation over here, trigger manually, form submission, which I use a lot, and also webhook call, which is what allows a GPT, like in this automation here, which takes in a YouTube link. You drop it into a GPT. That GPT then calls the webhook, which then starts the automation, sends back a nicely formatted transcript with timestamps, callouts, tables, key points, all of that, and then goes ahead and makes a markdown file, which is then sent to Dropbox, which is linked to my Obsidian vault. Because for me to learn n8n as quickly as I did, I needed to understand the key part of the word workflow. This is a 2-node workflow. And the key part of that word is flow. That's how the information, whatever it is, the data you're automating, the process you're automating, how the data moves through the nodes. In this form node, the way that the nodes are laid out in n8n really helped me to understand how it works. On one side, you'll have the input. In this case, this is a trigger node, so it would be the input from a form. And here you have what happens to the form or how the data is mapped into an output here, which then moves along, in this case, to be mapped into a spreadsheet, where you can see here on this side, the left side, it has all of the input, and the right side has the output. One of the wonderful things that the n8n team did was give us different ways to see the data. And this actually did come into play for me numerous times when building, wanting to see the data as a table or a JSON. And each of these had their place at different times in the building process. And when I grab the middle part of the node here, where all the information is kept, I can move it to the left or the right to highlight one side or the other and see more information. So they've given you a lot of ways to see your data, which does play a part, as well as the settings here, which we'll look at later on when I show you about notes. Another wonderful thing about n8n that helps you learn quickly is that the docs that pertain to this particular node is up here in the right-hand side. And you're taken directly to the information that shows you how to use this specific node. And the other flexible aspect of n8n is its ability to move nodes around where you want them to go, which definitely comes into play when you have a longer automation, like the podcast automation. I really feel that I can better understand at a glance what an automation is doing when it is grouped and colored the way this one is. These color blocks are done using sticky notes. And when you hover over a sticky note, you'll see a pop-up which shows a color palette. A note to the n8n team. Having such a limited amount of colors is, well, limiting. It would be wonderful if I could make these nodes follow whatever color I want so that I can use the color scheme for my branding or any other color scheme I would like. Not only is having the color blocks so helpful visually, including these big block sticky notes so you can actually put sticky notes behind each other. It would be wonderful if I could lock down these sticky notes. Once you have these in your workflow, it becomes pretty difficult to actually work with the nodes, which you can move around wherever you'd like. This is that flexibility that I was talking about with n8n, and it is absolutely one of its most powerful features. Unlike tools like Active Pieces, this is the second automation I had ever built here in Active Pieces. And you can see this, like Zapier, is an up and down, locked in way of seeing the nodes. There's no creativity here. There's no way to organize all of these nodes into something that looks beautiful and graceful like we've seen in n8n, and most importantly, more understandable. And once you get into very long automations like I have, just having a very long bunch of nodes lined up like this, vertically stacked, is just, it's going to become very difficult and confusing after a very short period of time. The executions area is done very well, and there is nothing more helpful when you are trying to figure out why an automation didn't run as being able to click on that automation and see exactly what the problem is and be able to debug it, basically open up the automation as it was when it ran and see exactly what the problem is, which is hugely helpful in learning, because you will create problems with your automations. There will be things that don't work, and much of the later stage of the automation building process is debugging. Coming out to the main menu of n8n, their great user interface continues by showing you workflows, credentials, and executions, which you'll see that I use my YouTube Notes workflow all the time. I'm constantly dropping in links to videos and getting their transcripts neatly formatted into my Obsidian Vault. I love this automation. If you were to purchase, for example, the YouTube transcript workflow automation that I have on the Gumroad site, if you want a link to all of those products, there's a link in the description and the pinned comment. But if you bought one of those, it's very simple to install it, no matter how big the automation is. Just import from file, and it will show up right here on your canvas. Let's say you buy this podcast automation workflow. No matter how many nodes that this workflow has, this one has 52 nodes. It doesn't matter. It will import whether it's 2 nodes or 52 nodes, which brings me to another amazing aspect of n8n. Get ready for this one. This one is really good. n8n, if you self-host it, is free. Seriously, n8n can be free. There are numerous ways that you can self-host it. Let's say you have a computer that's on 24/7 in case you have a scheduled workflow, or it's on when you know that you're going to want to run your workflows. As long as your computer is on and it's a decent, powerful computer, you can self-host n8n. Free. All free. They have a free community edition. It doesn't have all of the features that you would find in the enterprise or pro editions, but for a single solopreneur such as myself, and I'm guessing many of you are, the community edition works perfectly well. If you want to try out n8n, but you don't yet want to get into self-hosting, I would just give it a try on the starter plan and do the free trial, which I believe is 2 weeks. Though correct me on that if I'm wrong. Once you've had a taste of n8n, and if you feel as hooked about it as I did when I first started using it, you can then move on to hosting it on another site. And I am using DigitalOcean for that, which I highly recommend, and also comes recommended from n8n themselves. And I am paying $8 a month, and that is for infinite nodes. I can do an automation that has 2 nodes, that has 100 nodes. The length of the automation doesn't matter. There's no limit on that, nor is the number of workflows. And once you discover how automation solves your problems and turns something that was a pain in the rear, such as getting a nicely formatted YouTube transcript into my Obsidian Vault with note properties and links, quotes, and timestamps, all of that with simply copying and pasting a link into a GPT. Once you get the bug for this, you're going to want to have a lot of workflows. And that's the first problem you're going to run into on the starter plan. You can only have 5 active workflows. And some of my workflows, like this one here that pulls the New York Times bestsellers into a GPT so I can just see the list of what's hot this week in the book world, right in my ChatGPT with one request, you're going to start making a lot of workflows. That's what I'm telling you. And you're going to run out of those 5 workflows pretty quickly. But still, to get a taste of n8n and see how it works and whether it's for you, I do recommend the starter plan free trial. One more point I want to make on the cost, comparing it. When I look at Zapier and make.com, one of the reasons I never really got into those tools is because I knew that the more I built, the more I spent. This was the first automation I ever built. It was built with the help of GPT-3 in ChatGPT back when you couldn't upload screenshots. You could only put in text. There was no voice input. There was no ability to upload documents. There was nothing. There was just basically text and a whole lot of pain. But I did build this out here in make.com. But why didn't I go any deeper with make.com or Zapier? It basically boils down to the fact that I knew that as I created this scenario, each time data moved through each one of these steps, it was going to cost me. And that kept me from feeling free enough to explore and build something out, as opposed to n8n, where I could just build to my heart's content. What node is next? Well, let's try this one. And I was able to explore and learn through experimentation without wondering how much this was going to hit my wallet down the road. Particularly for an automation like this podcast automation, which was running on the daily. So this would add up and cost me a pretty penny if I were using Zapier for this same automation. Those are the benefits of n8n. A beautiful user interface. It's clean, it's minimal, it does what you need when you need it. A wonderful way to see how data moves through the nodes that can be moved or even resized. The ability to add more than one trigger for flexibility. And there's that word again. about n8n, how flexible it is. The simplicity of being able to install workflows just from a file or download your workflow to save it. But n8n is not a perfect app. It's got a couple of annoyances, which I'm really going to hit on because they are really, really annoying. But I don't believe they're deal breakers for the tool. And I'm hoping that the developers who I will tell about this video see this and make these changes. Because another benefit to n8n is that you get regular updates, sometimes weekly updates, but they are on the ball with improving the software. So there's a good chance that by the time you use n8n, these annoyances may be gone. I'm going to hit the plus button up in the top left-hand corner to open up a blank workflow. The first annoyance with n8n is how I'm imagining that they built out this user interface. Whoever designed this user interface, as I have said, did a great job. And it's almost like they visualized out the user interface, something on some sort of user interface UI visualization tool, where they said over here on the left is going to be the sidebar. At the top, we're going to have the title, here this button, and everything looks like it's been wonderfully thought out. And I just wonder if the person who created the user interface actually uses the interface. I'm not sure because they missed some really tiny but deeply annoying little details. Like, for example, this sidebar here. I'm going to close the sidebar because I like to be able to see and be able to get as much of my canvas in the screen as possible. But let's say I go to lunch and come back and reload the screen, and there is that sidebar open again. That is annoyance number one. It is extremely annoying to have to click this every time. And if you think I'm just going to be happy with keeping it open, au contraire, I will not. I will not. So I will just sit here and click this, getting more and more irritated. It is irritating. So that little thing here, maybe the person who designed this just doesn't think about closing this and keeping it closed. I'm not sure, but it should be persistent. And in my YouTube notes automation, I'm going to open up this transcript node here. This is an OpenAI node. And one of the things that you do in AI automation is a lot of prompt crafting. So I'm going to just scroll down here and you can see that there's a whole prompt chain here, which is what creates the actual formatted note that you get from the transcript. And let's say I want to show this, let's say to you, and I want to scroll down to see more. So I hover over the scroll bar and there's annoyance number 2. Trying to hit the scroll bar, the grab area for moving the window, which is part of the wonderful flexibility of n8n, hovers right over the scroll bar. And in order to get the scroll bar, you have to literally get into this like 1 pixel little area right here on the very edge of the scroll bar in order to actually scroll. And it took me 2 tries to do that, to actually scroll up and down. Again, this is one of those highly annoying, like, do they actually use this interface? Like at all? Problem. Okay, I admit it. Those are a little nitpicky, but they do add up if you have to do it day after day, because I love this program. So I'm in it often for hours at a time. And when I'm working with prompt chains particularly and having to scroll up and down, it really starts to get to you. But this next thing was something that was so annoying and disheartening that I almost gave up on the program. So I want to give you a heads up here to avoid this. It's simple, but difficult if you're a beginner. For this one, I've got a simple little 3-step automation here to showcase what I mean. So to illustrate this, I'm going to run a test workflow here, which will pull data through the workflow and land it here in this final automation. And this may be a problem with me just being a beginner and not understanding, but you can see there's no input data in this branch, and that's because I have an if node. If the output is true to the criteria I've set up here, it will move the data through. In this case, the output is false, and I've still hooked it in here to the spreadsheet. And you would think that I should be able to see this data, but I can't. And I can't click on one of these. These will just send me back to the previous node like this. And I cannot see how I can find the false branch items, if I click in here, they still don't show up. So that's the first part of the annoyance. n8n gives you things that it seems like you should be able to do, but you actually can't. And for no good reason that I can see. That is one part of the example, but I'm going to go ahead and undo this true branch here and just have the false branch coming into this node. I'm going to click on it again, and there's now my input. So why couldn't I see that before, or be able to select, see the input even if it's coming through the false branch? Sometimes that's what I might want. So they give you so much flexibility, but sometimes they say, well, yeah, you can do this thing. It's not going to work, but you can still do it. And that's pretty annoying, but it's not as annoying as the item versus first conundrum. I'm going to show you that by drawing your attention here to the name field. And you can see here that I'm going to remove this and show you where this is coming from. I'm going to pull this in from the first form submission. I'm just going to drop this in here. It comes in as an expression. This is a JavaScript expression, meaning that whatever is in this field when the form comes in will be mapped for you to do what you want to do, such as in this case, put it into your first name field in your Google Sheets. And you can see that when the expression comes in, it comes in as an item. The problem being that if n8n cannot see this information earlier on in the workflow, which will happen if the data is split at times, such as in this true-false branch, or in this longer automation, I had a node, this generate share links node, which I absolutely had to put a success or error on. And so sometimes the data, if it was coming through, it would come through the success branch and move on into the workflow. But I found that when I got later on into the workflow, and specifically this update episode data, this was basically mapping all of the generated metadata and earlier data into the Google Sheets for this particular episode. And I began to have problems right around here, and I kept getting errors. And specifically, when I would take the item, as I've shown you before, and I would drag it into the spreadsheet on that podcast automation, it would show up red, and it would show me an undefined. Basically, it couldn't see this information. And the only way I was able to fix it is by changing this from item to first. And I didn't even know and still struggle to understand what item first. I know more or less what it means, but it doesn't make sense to me why sometimes it needs to be item, sometimes it needs to be first. It is unclear. And also, when you tried to run this, you would get an error over here, and the error itself was unclear. So the point here for the n8n team and for you watching this, deciding if you want to use this software, is this. n8n is very powerful, and it is a fantastic software. But to the n8n team, if you give your newbie beginner automator, doesn't know JavaScript, if it bit me on the backside, user the ability to drag something into it, in other words, say, hey, it's okay to go ahead and do this, and then it causes this, that's a fail. Never should you make your user be punished for using the software as you show them to use it. And that really is all I have to complain about n8n. The rest of n8n is pure power, particularly these two nodes. I'm going to draw your attention to this node over here in the podcast automation, which is the fourth node in the automation. This is one of the two most powerful nodes in n8n, and it's called the code node. Now, if you are about to nope out because I just said the word code, hold on a minute. I know how you feel, because I cannot write code either. I cannot write it, and I can kind of read it, but only because I can see here what each part is doing, and I can sort of piece together more or less what's happening. But what makes the code node so powerful is its ultimate flexibility. And I'll show you that with this node right here, which is taking the output from the previous node, which is fetching the last scheduled episode and its date from Transistor, from the podcast host that I'm using, and calculating the next date and the next highest episode. When I got to this point in the automation, I was just beginning in my journey. I couldn't figure out how to do this with any of the nodes in here. Now, it turns out that there was a node that could do it, as far as I know, but I didn't discover that node until I needed to get to the next step. And that's because the code node can do even more than what is already available. So when you're working in Zapier or make.com, you're kind of limited, especially Zapier, with what they have. If they don't have the thing that does what you need, then you're kind of SOL, really, because I can't read or write code. Maybe you can't read or write code, but one very cool thing can. And that's ChatGPT and other large language models. And this is what I want to tell you. If you're looking for something that's no code because you say no code, you're locking yourself into a lack of flexibility to solve your problems in whichever way your brain thinks of. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about with core nodes, these are the nodes for data transformation. You've seen the date and time, and we've seen here the code node. You also have the nodes that you use for filtering the data. I've shown you the if node in a previous workflow. But then you finally also have the node for making an HTTP request. And this node is the second most powerful node, which you can see here in this upload to Ghost HTTP node. This uploads all of the formatted data. It needs to be in a specific JSON format to work with the Ghost API. Now, I looked for a Ghost node, and there is one here. But for reasons I don't know why, it doesn't make it clear that not only can you get a post, but you can also make a post. So I thought you could only do these two things, and I didn't need any of these two things. I needed to make a post, so I used the HTTP node. And what the HTTP node does is it allows your automation to connect to the outside world, to any service that has an API, any service. You can use that API and connect out to that service. In this case, I'm connecting to Ghost and bringing in the formatted JSON of the message. And this highlights another thing about n8n's nodes is that you're reliant, if you use their integrations, like the Ghost node that I just showed you that they have, you're reliant on how that node is set up. And the node, for some reason, in n8n does not allow you to add an image, a featured image like this one, to your blog post. This is a huge oversight. I have no idea why they don't allow that in that node, but they don't. That means, though, using the HTTP node, you're no longer locked in to just go, oh, well, I guess I'll just have to upload that image manually, because let me tell you, I am absolutely categorically against uploading anything manually. If I can avoid doing it now that I've discovered the wonder of automation. And even though it would just be a little step, those little steps, like the little sidebar annoyance, they add up over time. And just like with the Ghost integration in n8n, if you find a tool that has an integration, but it doesn't do everything you want, and there's more things you want to be able to do with that, you're free to be able to upload no matter what it is that's in the API. It can be created as an HTTP node. And another cool thing about the HTTP node is this little button right here. This import CURL button is a lifesaver. Whoever put this here in n8n, I love you. I absolutely adore you. This button is fantastic. what it does is when you're using API documentation frequently, they will show you how to make an API call, how it should be structured, and they'll format it as a CURL command. I don't know if I'm saying this right. I don't know if it should be curl or CURL, but I'm going to say it in that way. Let me know in the comments if I'm doing it incorrectly. You just import that command here, and it will then fill out everything in one click right into your HTTP node. This is such a time saver. Okay, I know that I have told you and teased about this little tip that's so life-changing and all of that, and so here it is. I have these 2 nodes here in this workflow. You've seen this wait list form for the AI Automators Prompt Crafting Society. And when I open up this node here, let's say I want to add a note to the nodes. So I'm going to just type in here, this is a note field. And I'm going to actually change that to, this is the note field, just to make it 100% clear. And I'm not going to do that here for this form one, though there is a note field here in the form. So I'm going to click here on the canvas, and I'm going to hit Control A. And you can see here that I now have both of these nodes selected. That means, and here it is, here's that wonderful tip, that I can now cut or copy, and these nodes are not gone. They are, in fact, I'm going to click up here in my clipboard. They are pasted. That means I can now take these nodes and literally copy and paste them right into ChatGPT. Because what you're looking at is JavaScript. That is what n8n is based on. The user interface is just a interface over where the real power is, which is the JavaScript, the structure of the node. And because the node, which is something graphical in Zapier or in make.com, can be turned into text. And once it can be turned into text, you can give it a prompt. In this case, asking it to add notes for what each node does and what should be in that node. To output that in JavaScript in a code block. This is important so that you just can copy and paste it. And to make no other changes to the nodes. I put that in all caps to really make sure that the model follows that direction. Because if there's anything changed here, missing a comma or something like that, you will not be able to paste it back into the canvas. Here is the output from ChatGPT with the notes fields for both notes now added. I'm going to click copy code, and I'm going to click here. Wherever you click in the canvas, the top left-hand corner of the very first node will show up right at your mouse click, like so. Now I'm going to open this up. To remove that error, it just needed to connect here with the credentials for my particular Google Sheets. And there is both of the nodes. If we open the node and take a look in the settings, there, look at that. There are the notes. This blows my mind. If I were to try and do this in make.com with this Etsy upload listing scenario, it would be impossible. The only way that I would be able to put notes, if they even have notes field, I don't know if they do, in each one of these steps here would be to do it manually by hand. Because it is 2025, baby, and what that means is that those who are using AI automation to solve their problems, remove their friction on the path towards their goals, are the ones that are going to be shooting forward into success throughout the year. And I intend to be one of those people, which is why I learned to use n8n to build out this automation that brings YouTube Notes into my Obsidian Vault. So if you want to know how I did that and even get a little tour of my Obsidian Vault, well, that video, it's on screen right now.